Hi there, I'm Dr. Christian Lehman, and today we're going to be discussing two Homeric hymns, the hymn to Demeter and the hymn to Hermes. All right, let's jump into things here. We're going to be using a translation by Daryl Hine as we get into the Homeric hymns to Demeter and Hermes. So let's start with just the idea of what is a Homeric hymn. Well, we have 33 of these things. I would call them strange oddities, but I don't want to characterize them that way because some might seem to be odd. But anytime you're looking at a hymn in any religion, things are going to jump out that seem odd to other people. Rather, I want to call them perhaps gems, although that might give an artificial sense of wealth as well. So let's just call them poems, hymns. They feature praise for mostly the Olympian pantheon, which is what we just studied, gaining hegemonic control over Olympus by while we were working on Hesiod. They are named after Homer, so calling it the Homeric hymn is like, oh, it's by Homer, but this is certainly not by Homer because there is no such thing as Homer. Homer is a conflation. But rather, we use the title because of the poetic meter in which these were composed, that is the dactylic hexameter, which Hesiod also used. So I don't know why we don't call them the Hesiodic hymns, which seems in some ways perhaps more appropriate, although several of them do seem to antedate Hesiod. And this is a meter in which they were composed and sung. And we're going to see some delightful elements of that when we come to Hermes. These hymns primarily provide origin stories and myths. They describe spheres of influence and how gods came to inhabit those spheres, and they use and deploy various epithets and things like this. Epithets are adjectival descriptors. So today, just because we read them largely for their mythy qualities, we should not suppose that they did not serve an important religious function in earlier ages. The key word for today is going to be etiology. And etiology is when myths explain something that we experience or have in daily life. So for instance, when we studied Mekone, that explains why we sacrifice. So it gives an etiology of the reason why we divide sacrificial offerings up the way that we do. However, fundamentally, most of all, these hymns are about negotiations of power. So you'll recall, with looking at the theogony, we established Zeus's hegemonic control on Olympus. It also said that Zeus divided certain responsibilities up. But by looking at these hymns, we see how those divisions happen. And maybe we also see something of a potential weakness on Zeus's part. And it can be read two ways, right? One, he's not completely autocratic because he is willing to negotiate some of these spheres. So maybe that's a positive. Or two, well, maybe he is weak and can't maintain the establishment. So this is up to you to decide. You can engage with this power negotiation. But we will continue to talk about power. Who has it, who wants it, and how do you exchange it? Let's jump into the hymn to Demeter. The hymn to Demeter is best known because of its description of Persephone and Hades. The modern appearance of Persephone and Hades on the internet is one that we will maybe look into, I'm not sure, but largely it will narrativize it as a romance. And what I hope to show by looking at this, the oldest version of this, is it's not a romance. So it opens. Awesome Demeter, the goddess with beautiful hair, I begin to sing about her and her trim-ankled daughter, whom Idoneus, that's Hades, raped, or was given by Zeus, the deep thunderer widely discerning. When she was playing apart from her mother, Demeter, the golden giver of glorious fruit, with the deep-bosomed daughters of ocean, gathering flowers, the roses and crocus that grow in the midst of deep, grassy meadows, as well as fair lilies and hyacinths, iris and the narcissus, which earth, at the bidding of Zeus, had produced, to please the receiver of many, a snare for the flower-faced maiden. So we'll stop there just for a second. As I mentioned, this is a hymn, and hymns use lots of honorifics, what are called epithets, to describe. Right? If you have a religion in which you call your deity like most high or most holy, you are engaged in that epithetizing. So here already we have Demeter is awesome, that is capable of creating awe, producing fear. She's called a goddess with beautiful hair. We also have her trim-ankled daughter. So her daughter has this epithet. Zeus gets deep thunder, widely discerning, right? Because he's like the king god, so he looks all around his demesne. And it continues. So the daughters of ocean are deep bosom. Demeter is also golden and giver of fruit. That's because of like the way harvest tassels look. So then we get Hades. Hades is a really interesting one, right? Zeus had produced to please the receiver of many. So the receiver of many is Hades. Who are the many that he receives? Dead bodies. All right, so that's why Hades is called the receiver of many. This issue that's really important that we need to look at is raped or was given. Either way, it's going to be highly problematic. It's going to not be about any agency on the part of Persephone or on Demeter. It is going to be very much like male negotiation. Raped etymologically means to be snatched away, but it has this sexual sense as well. This is a utter lack of consent. And I want you to see where it happens. We are in a meadow. I'm going to have to change that font color. Meadows are places of liminal space. And they're liminal because it's neither, it's in between, right? Like it's not a forest, but it's not also like flat. It's an in-between space. It's a space of lots of fluorescence. That's why there's always all these flowers. So it's very fecund. Fecund means fertile. And then we see that this Narcissus is a trap, right? It's a snare. So the maiden was struck with amazement and reached out both of her hands to seize the desirable playthings. This is a trap, a snare. Then Earth, the extensively traveled, gaped in the prairie of Nyssa, and he who had several names, the monarch who welcomed so many, the underworld offspring of Kronos. Like, look at all of these epithets for Hades that we're getting. Leapt with his immortal horses straight out of the chasm upon her, catching her up on his glittering chariot. She was unwilling. Carried her off, still complaining. She wailed at the top of her voice. She called on her father, the highest and blessed, the successor of Kronos. Nobody heard her, however. Not one of the undying gods nor men who are born to perish. Not even the rich, fruited olives. No one but Perseus' daughter, considerate Hecate, heard her. All right, so this poem opens aggressively and violently with a girl being stolen from her friends, from her mother, from her home, and it's happening for an ambiguous reason. Is it because Hades has emerged and just done this thing, or was she given by Hades' brother? Well, we learn next. It was with Zeus's connivance that Hades, his paternal brother, host and director of many, the lord who has several titles, Kronos' notorious son, had abducted the maid, all reluctant, driving his immortal horses. So long as the goddess beheld the earth and stars and the sky and the beams of the sun and the roaring sea full of fish, and the maiden expected the sight of her noble mother, as well as her kindred, the gods who are ever begotten, hope still enchanted her generous spirit in spite of her anguish. And here, we're not going to dwell on it, but you might think of possible connections to Pandora and the notion of hope that we've been working through. This is a moment when we're developing something that we also saw in Hesiod. So you'll remember from the Theogony around line 912, then to Demeter's bed he came, he Zeus, Demeter bountiful. She bore white-armed Persephone, whom Idoneus from her mother's side did carry off, and Zeus gave her to him. So remember, Zeus is Persephone's father. Demeter is distraught and searching for her daughter. Hecate says, well, I saw this thing I don't really understand. And so Demeter goes to Helios, the sun god. And the sun god sees everything, right? Because the sun god is in the sky, as long as it's not happening at night. This is the sun god speaking, Helios. Nevertheless, mighty goddess, desist from extravagant mourning. It is not proper in vain to indulge your insatiate anger. Idoneus, the ruler of many, is not an unlikely son-in-law. He is your brother. And furthermore, he obtained worship in the first tribal division of the world when the doom was decided. dwelling with those over whom Hades' lot once appointed him ruler. So here we learn something that you already know, but the division of 3 lots, that's 3 gambles, 3 dice. So a lot is a partitioning in a gamble. It's like drawing lots, if you've heard that. Zeus gets Olympus, Poseidon gets the sea, and Hades gets the underworld. And so Helios is like, you know what? There's a lot worse guys out there. So again, this is all a kind of circle of men that are saying these things. Be thinking about these gender politics here. Anguish, more bitter and violent, entered the heart of Demeter. Angry, henceforth, with the black, clouded king of the gods, she avoided heavenly meetings in lofty Olympus. She went in disguise from city to city of men and splendid achievements of mankind, wasting her looks a great while, so that nobody, whether of men or broad-girdled women, would recognize her upon sight, till she reached the home of sharp-witted Celius, the ruler of fragrant Eleusis. Deo, is a nickname for Demeter, sat down on the roadside, consuming her heart with sorrow, next to the spring of the maiden, where women who lived in the city came for their water and shade, for above it there flourished an olive. And so here we see a goddess walking among humans. Right? So there's this idea that exists in ancient Greece of Xenia. And this is going to be a little bit abstract. Don't worry if you don't catch this all. You can rewatch it, and we'll also return to this concept. Xenia is guest friendship. And it's the idea that when somebody comes and asks for help, you give them the help because you never know if they're a god or not. One of the things this hymn is doing is it's explaining to us the consequences of not recognizing a god or of recognizing it. So again, it's this kindness toward strangers. Here we have the first one. Like an old woman, she was in appearance, one born in the distant past, who has long outworn childbed and has no more part in the gifts of her who loves wreaths, Aphrodite, right? So this is also pretty ageist. It's saying like at a certain point, people get old and then they're not interested in sex, love, and desire anymore. It's not true. This is a myth that society perpetuates. Of such are the nurses of children, or in the echoing mansions of kings who administer justice, housekeepers. Such she appeared to the 4 Eleusinian maidens coming to fetch the available water back home in their brazen pitchers under the affectionate home of their father Celeus. 4 of them, lovely as goddesses, still in the flower of girlhood, namely Callidice, Damo, and pretty Cleisidice, with their older sister Calithoe. None of them recognized Deo. Difficult are the immortals for mortals to know when they see them. So this is that idea that I was just pointing to. Notice that this is a circle of women helping other women, young girls and older women. Demeter speaks. Daughters, whoever you are, for I see that indeed you are women, greetings. I shall tell you my story. It isn't improper that I should tell you the truth, since you earnestly ask me to do so. Doso is my name, my reverend mother imposed upon me. Recently, over the breadth of the sea, I unwillingly crossed from Crete. Yes, unwillingly. Pirates abducted me forcefully, using strength of necessity. In their swift vessel, they landed soon after, somewhere near Thoricus. There, all the women in bands went ashore. The menfolk accompanied them. In the shade of the prow of their ship, they spread out their supper. My heart was not set on the tasty repast, so secretly, slipping away in the darkness cross-country, I quickly fled from my arrogant masters in order that they might not enjoy my ransom, who carried me off like booty unbought or unpaid for. Wandering, I have come here, and I do not have any idea what is the name of this country or who its inhabitants may be. But I pray those who inhabit Olympian mansions to give you suitable husbands and birth of such children as mothers desire. So Demeter says, I'm going to tell you the truth, and immediately does what? Tells a lie. And it's a Cretan lie, which later on we're also going to see Odysseus tell several stories that stem from coming from Crete. Again, we won't go into that now, but you might keep in mind this phrase, Cretan lies. There's an idea that goes like this. Every Cretan is a liar. If a Cretan tells you that they're lying, are they telling a lie? Notice her story features these elements of abduction and pirates, threats of rape and ransom. So her lie contains elements of similar story, what we have already seen with the truth of the hymn, the truth of the hymn. They run to their mother. The goddess, however, and so now they're coming to Callias' house in Eleusis. The goddess, however, in crossing the threshold, reached to the roof with her head, filled the doorway with heavenly splendor. Reverence, awe, and a sickening terror seized Metanera, that's the mother. So she arose from her chair and invited her guest to be seated. Dio, the bringer of seasons and giver of glorious gifts, not wishing to sit on the glittering chair without speaking a long while, stood with her beautiful eyes on the ground, till good-hearted Yambe brought over a carpeted stool after throwing a silvery sheepskin over it. There sat the goddess, upholding her veil in her hands in front of her face, without utterance, grief-stricken mute on the footstool. So here's just this idea that gods can't actually keep themselves hidden. She has to reveal herself somewhat. Notice again, we're hitting these elements. It's women, women, women. Women all taking care of other women. Shortly after this, Yambe does make Deo laugh, and largely it seems to be she probably shows Demeter her genitals. And so there's this idea of sexualized humor that's happening here. Handsomely girt, Metanera began to attempt the conversation. Greetings, good woman. I do not suppose you descended from base-born parents, but rather from noble, for dignity shines in your eyes and grace, as they shine from the faces of kings who administer justice. Womankind must endure all the gifts of the gods, though we suffer out of necessity, seeing their yoke has been laid upon our shoulders. Now you've come here, whatever is mine will be yours to dispose of. Take then this child unto nurse, my dear son, lately born and unlooked for, whom the immortals have sent me in answer to my supplication. If you bring up the boy till he comes to the measure of manhood, anyone seeing you then, any woman will envy you. For the gift that I promise his mother for the gift that I promise his mother will give in reward for raising. So here's the promise. Hey, you, raise my kid. If it's strong, you'll get a lot. This is some oddity here. But I want to talk about this phrase, the yoke, especially this idea of yoke of necessity. This is what a yoke looks like, in case you don't know, right? It's the thing that binds cows together. It's also, in the bottom image, this thing where you can carry 2 water buckets on either side, right? So it's this burden that you have to carry, and it's labor and it's work. And it's a common metaphor in Greek literature. So just be aware that that's there and exists. And so here's how Demeter goes about trying to raise this kid, Demophaon. Thus it fell that Demeter brought up in the palace the brilliant Demophaon, son of sharp-witted Celeus and fair Metanera. Quickly he grew and waxed strong, like a true supernatural being, eating no food, neither fed at the breast of his mother. Demeter rubbed him with ambrosia, like one engendered of heaven, fragrantly breathing upon him and holding the child in her bosom. Nightly, she buried him in the midst of the fire like a firebrand, all unbeknownst to his parents, to whom it appeared a great wonder how he was growing precocious and how he resembled the gods. And she might have made him immortal and ageless, except for the folly of well-girt Metanera, who, spying one night from her chamber, saw what the goddess was doing. She shrieked and belabored her flanks in terror, hysterical over her son and distracted in mind, and as she lamented, she uttered the following hasty expressions. Demophaon, darling, behold what the outlandish woman has hid you, right in the midst of the fire, to my grief and unbearable anguish. So here we have this idea that Demeter is kind of like taking her sorrow for having lost her daughter and putting it on this other child, trying to turn them into a substitute immortal, and then gets caught. So this is a warning, I suppose. She gets pissed. Wetless are humans, and gross, inconsiderate, thoughtless, and stupid, lacking foreknowledge of fate, whether evil or good will befall them. You, in your folly, have erred to the highest degree, Metanera. Witness the pitiless waters of Styx, the great oath of the gods, that I should have made your dear son an immortal, and furthermore ageless all of his days, and moreover have given him evergreen honor. Now he has not any way of escaping from death or misfortune. I am Demeter, the venerable, to immortals and mortals, mightiest source of delight and of physical sustenance also. Go now, and build me a sizable temple and altar beneath it. Let the whole populace build it, in sight of the citadel's steep walls, over the spring Calicaris, upon a conspicuous hillside. I shall instruct you myself in my mysteries, so that hereafter, when you perform them, you may do so piously, winning my favor. So it's always fun when the gods come down and remind us that we lack foreknowledge of fate. All we know is that someday we will die, because we are all of these things: gross, inconsiderate, thoughtless, and stupid. Connecting this to the theogony, right? You'll remember our discussion of the Styx and the great oath, right? That you swear that results in social death. The most interesting thing here, though, is what we get at this point. Because this is the establishment. Let's respell that. The establishment of, and this is why it's important you're listening to me at the same time, because this would make no sense otherwise, of cult. So this is the cult action of Demeter. If you want to learn how to worship her, you need to go to Eleusis and get inducted in the rites of Demeter so that you can get all the good things that will come to you as a result. It's kind of giving us the etiology of why these exist. So now Demeter is sad, and she's going to create a massive drought. But Demeter, whose hair is like ripe corn, sitting apart from the blessed immortals, from all her kindred, waited and wasted away with regret for her trim-ankled daughter. Then a most terrible year over the inhabited earth she caused for mankind, and a cruel. The soil did not let any seedlings come to the surface. Demeter, once handsomely garlanded, hid them. Many a crescent-shaped plowshare the oxen in vain dragged through furrows. Much was the colorless barley that fell without fruit to the good earth. Now were the race of articulate men altogether destroyed by hardship and famine, depriving the gods who inhabit Olympus of their invidious worship, the honors and sacrifices. Had not Zeus taken thought and considered what ought to be done to prevent it. So, 1, drought. Drought. 2, uh-oh. And is Zeus mad, or sad, or scared that humans are suffering? Only insofar as human suffering means he gets no sacrifices. Remember Mekone. Remember Mekone. So, as a result, Zeus sends Iris down and then all the other gods, because Demeter keeps saying no and they keep refusing. She's like, I don't want gifts. I don't want gifts. All I want is my daughter. So she was angry at heart, and she sternly rejected their speeches, saying she never again would set foot upon fragrant Olympus, never would suffer the corn and the fruit of the earth to awaken, till she beheld with her own eyes the face of her lovely daughter. When Father Zeus, the widely discerning deep thunderer, heard this, he into Erebus, sent the destroyer of Argus, that's Hermes, with his gold wand, so that with soft words he had talked over obdurate, stubborn Hades, he might lead holy Persephone out of the visible darkness into the light and the company of the immortals. So then her mother, Demeter, beholding her child, might abate her resentment. Hermes then goes down to Hades' realm. When he discovered the ruler at home in the midst of his palace, this is Hermes speaking. Hades, with gold-colored ringlets, dictator of those who have perished, all Father Zeus has commanded me forthwith to fetch back the maiden, noble Persephone, out of the underworld, so that her mother may, at the sight of her daughter, desist from her anger and dreadful fury against the immortals. For know that she meditates mighty deeds, the destruction of feeble mankind from the face of the earth by hiding the seeds underground, and thus utterly blasting the worship of the immortals. She harbors a dreadful resentment, no longer visits the gods, but she sits in her incense odoriferous temple far away, holding the rocky Acropolis over Eleusis. Right, so for Demeter, this famine, it's happening, but she still gets all these honors from the people of Eleusis that she made build her a temple. So remember, negotiation of power. Demeter started with nothing. Zeus didn't even think to consult her when he gave her his daughter away to Hades. Now, all the gods have come to Demeter. Demeter holds all the power because what has she done? She's withheld that which the gods need. She found a way to negotiate power. When he had finished, the Lord, that's he, Hermes, the Lord of the underworld, Aeneas, lifted his eyebrows and smiled. Nonetheless, he obeyed the behest of Zeus, for he summoned and said to sharp-witted Persephone quickly, "Go then, Persephone, back to the arms of your sable-robed mother, keeping a gentle and kind disposition and heart in your bosom. Do not indulge in excessive despondency more than is proper. I shall, among the immortals, not prove an unsuitable husband, being your father's own brother, the brother of Zeus. In this kingdom you shall be mistress of everything living and creeping, and have the greatest proportion of honor among the immortals. Eternal shall be the penalties of those transgressors hereafter, whoever fail to propitiate your mighty Godhead by sacrifice and the pious performance of rites and the payment of suitable presents." When he had spoken, exceedingly clever Persephone was glad. Blithely she leapt up, delighted, but Hades himself gave her something, edible, covertly. Namely, a sweet pomegranate seed, just one, peering about him suspiciously so that she should not abide the rest of her days at the sight of her mother, impressive Demeter. All right, so here things are happening. Hades is setting stuff in motion. He's trying to persuade Persephone that, hey, things are going to be okay. I'm a good husband. Like, this is a good kingdom. You're going to have lots of power. And he adds this other trick: eat this food. This raises a question that people debate, which is, how willing at this point is Persephone to engage in this eating of the fruit? Hermes brings Persephone back to her mother. Even as Dio was holding Persephone safe in her arms, her mind began to suspect some deception. She anxiously trembled, checked her affectionate greeting a moment, and asked her a question. "Darling, while you were there underground, tell me, you did not partake, or did you, of any refreshment? Speak out. Do not try to conceal it. Better that both of us know. If you didn't, now you have arisen, dear, from the side of detestable Hades with me and your father, Cronus's umbrageous successor, and honored by all the immortals shall you abide. If you did, you must, fluttering back underneath the chasms of earth, make your dwelling a third of the year, and its seasons there, and the other 2 seasons with me and other immortals. When the earth is abloom with various flowers of springtime, then from the palpable darkness again you shall rise a great wonder. Both to the undying gods and men were born, but to perish. Now tell me, by what ruse the receiver of many deceived you?" Right? So it turns out Persephone has eaten something. This, by the way, is the etiology of the seasons. Right? We learn, it's crummy on earth and we can't grow any crops because Persephone is underground. So then we bring ourselves to the end. Demeter, this is kind of to a broad group of folks. The speaker turns away, stops telling the story, and says instead about more rites of Demeter. Demeter showed them her ritual service and taught them her mysteries. Even Diocles, princely Triptolemus, and Plexinus, the solemn mysteries which are unthinkable either to question or utter or transgress. For a holy respect checks the utterance of them. Happy the man who, of all those that inhabit this earth, has beheld them. The uninitiate, one without part of the ritual, however, gets any portion of similar blessings, whatever, once he has perished and passed away out of the vaporous darkness. So think about this hymn. This hymn is almost a missionary-like moment. Like, you really want to worship Demeter because we have the best secrets. And then we bring ourselves to an end. The poet is wrapping things up. Goddesses, holding in fee the republic of fragrant Eleusis, Paros amid the encircling waters and stony Antrona, mistress and bringer of seasons, queen, glorious giver, Demeter, you and your excellent, beautiful daughter Persephone, maiden, kindly and thanks for this poem assure me a pleasant subsistence. And I shall try to remember another about you and sing it. So we're actually going to end there, and I will put Hermes into a different video. So be sure to look out for that. As other YouTubers might say, like and subscribe, but I don't know.